Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk about another study technique that I find really helpful in my learning approach in medical school. Help me learn things better, more efficiently and easily. And I call it symbols. So before in my other videos, I talked about the shapes, which is like a method of chunking. I talked about hyphen, which is just the practice of breaking down words into their parts when I'm learning them or anytime I'm interacting with them. And then nickname, which is basically giving things nicknames. So just like nickname kind of builds off of hyphen, in a way, this symbol technique kind of builds off of nickname. And I'll demonstrate that in a bit. But basically the point is that's just good to represent things visually. There's a great guy on YouTube called Dr. Justin Song, who also completed medical school. He's a learning coach. He's a learning scientist. And one of the things that he'll talk about in his videos is making things visual. And that's a sentiment that I agree with. In my learning, the reason I think it's been very helpful is that, one, when you draw symbols, well, first let me say what I'm doing. I'm replacing words with symbols, okay? So I have symbols that I always use for certain terms. So as I'm writing my notes and things, I don't have to write out the word and the term, right? Would somebody else know what I meant if I was using the symbols and they were looking at my notes? No, right? Probably not, because they don't know what the symbols mean. That's why we have to use words and use language, because it's a standardized theme that everybody gets. But again, when we're learning things, we're not communicating with other people. We're communicating with ourselves, or at least when we're taking our notes and thinking in our head and things like that. So having these symbols, the fact that it's, that it's not an actual word is not an issue, right? So when I'm writing the notes, it's a lot faster because I don't have to write as many words. And being faster and more efficient is a very, very, very big help in med school. When I'm reading the notes, it's faster, right? Because I don't have to read a word. I just see the symbol and automatically know what it means. So it's kind of that idea, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Something that takes longer to describe in words, you can get the idea across in less space and less eye movement of looking at it when you use a symbol, right? Which just, again, makes things faster and easier. And that kind of small amount of time that you save, it adds up. Anyways, here are my symbols. It's also just like less work on your hand, like writing. Anyways, this is increase, decrease, right? Or more or less. This means too much or too little. It's just an arrow, but I add in extra little things. And again, the point is not really to use these symbols, it's just examples of the idea of using a lot of symbols for things. So I draw an arrow and add an extra thing. That means it's like too much, right? So if you say hyperplasia, I'm gonna put that and then growth, too much growth. Tachycardia, I'm gonna put that, well, I wouldn't do that. I put that and then do heart rate, right? The heart rate is too high, et cetera, et cetera. Right, low blood pressure versus a decrease in blood pressure is just that. But low blood pressure means it's too low, right? So I put the extra thing. This is for the heart, anything cardio, I'll put that. This is for blood, vascular stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But if I want to specify veins rather than blood in general, or rather than arteries, I'll use this one with the 2 lines, right? So arteries versus veins. Then as we started learning about renal and stuff, I needed a symbol for P. So I just did this with dots. So now I have my framework for renal, blood versus P. And that's how I view everything in renal physiology. And then I made one for bile too, because we started talking about it a lot in GI, and I didn't want to have to write it out so much. This is my symbol for nerves. It's a lightning bolt. So, nervous system, nervous disease affects the nerves, blah, blah, blah. I'll use this. For brain, I just draw brain with 2 little gyri on it and a little cerebellum. So there's that. And then this is like the whole central nervous system. I don't use this one that much. I don't even know why I put it here. But, it's like the brain with the nerve thing, right, spinal cord combined, going straight down. So it's just an example of how you can kind of come up with things that make sense to you. I've told people about this and had them have this concern of what if I forget what it means? It's a valid concern, but it's also not going to be an issue because you just come up with symbols that feel natural to you and then you use them consistently. So for instance, this thing is my symbol for enzyme. I'm not going to ever forget what that means because I use it all the time and I made it myself. I actually technically didn't, because you know how in those little diagrams that have the enzyme, then they'll have the substrate as this little thing, and then they kind of like show it like that when they say like it connects or whatever. So that's where I got it from, but I started using it without really thinking about it as my symbol for enzyme like years ago. So now, of course, I'm never going to look at my notes and be like, oh no, like I don't know what I meant. Now I can't read any of my notes and I'm screwed, you know? So it's kind of, it's like a worry people have, but it's one of those things where it's like, it's not going to be an issue. So don't let it hold you back. DNA, because DNA is the instructions for the body, right? It's the instructions, the source code for any organism. I just think of it as a book. That's my nickname for DNA, right? That's my little nickname for DNA, the book. Doesn't mean I always replace the word DNA with the book every single time I'm talking. It just means that I have that as a little theme of how I think about it. So if I want to, and again, it doesn't take a long time to write DNA, but still, if I want to represent something visually on my notes, or I want to represent DNA visually, I'll put a book. And again, it's not just about saving time with not having to write, but it's also about representing things visually, because it just helps with looking at them and learning things and all that stuff. There's people that talk more about that and why that's beneficial, but I just already know it's beneficial, so I just do it. So this is just a tool or a method of how I do it and apply it. So DNA is a book. So in my head, because RNA is something that's copied from that source code, but it's not like the original, it's like a lower level copy that can be moved around and stuff. So I put RNA as a piece of paper, right? It's like you copied out one of the pages from the book, and now you have that message, that mRNA, and that's paper. And I even like to think that since you can fold out the paper into a paper airplane, that's why the mRNA can leave out from the nucleus and go to where it needs to go. But I don't draw the paper airplane or anything because I'm not good at drawing those. But that's, again, part of my little mental schema. So DNA makes RNA, and then RNA makes protein. So for some reason, I needed a theme for protein. I had the thing for enzymes first. So my protein is just a little gingerbread man, or he's supposed to be like a little golem. And I think my thinking there was that proteins, I think of them as they actually do things. They're actually like machines or products that can actually do things in the cell, versus DNA and RNA are not an actual thing. They're not an actual product. They're just the instructions for a product, if that makes sense. So that's where I got the gingerbread thing. And now I use it so much, I barely could even remember why I started using it. But it just fit. But because I made it based off of my understanding of what proteins are, it even when I'm not thinking about why I started drawing it that way, the fact that I draw it that way and think of it that way still connects with the new things that I learn about proteins, because it's all consistent. And so that's helpful in that way. Anyway, so this is fat. So I made it after the protein one, so it's just like a protein, but like fatter and slimier and everything, a smiley face. So those are just some examples. So the idea is just like symbols. Yeah.